Good morning, AP Euro scholars. This is my first attempt for this class to give you a lecture overview of one of our topics. If this works for you guys, I'll continue to do it. I know you've all been assigned a country from each of the wars, so you'll be talking about some of the more specific things on your Google slides. So this is basically to give you some context. We've been talking about uh, World War I in the last couple of days before we left. So here's some context leading up to the war. Little sound effects for you. Once again, I expect to make a few mistakes today as I don't have a lot of experience doing this. I hope you're all well. And there were a lot of things leading up to this. Here are some of the main causes of the war. Militarism for M. We have an alliance system, which we're about to talk about in a few seconds. Imperialism and nationalism. Hopefully this you remember from your study of world history in ninth grade and perhaps from your U.S. study last year. Remember, I do have this PowerPoint with even some greater details on Google Classroom, so if it goes a little too fast for you, you can refer to that. So here's a political cartoon that shows you one of the causes of the war. You see Serbia in the front, and you have Austria behind, then Russia, Germany, France, and Great Britain in the back. So if you haven't figured out the message of this cartoon, it basically has to do with the alliance system, which we're going to talk about now. So you had these alliances, a lot of them secret prior to the war. Turn down the sound effects. We know that Germany and France had a hatred from one another from that Franco-Prussian War in which the French took a loss. So they had been preparing to get back at Germany ever since that loss. As you know, it was a humiliating defeat. But the most dangerous ones came over the fight over the territories in the Balkans. We know that Austria-Hungary was now having trouble controlling those many nationalities and ethnicities in the Balkans. So Bismarck foresaw a lot of problems coming from this territory. He called it the tinderbox of Europe. So he forms an alliance with Italy and Austria-Hungary. And in response, you have a triple entente between the French, Britain, and Russia. Most of this agreement came from having a common enemy at this time, which they were starting to fear, Germany. So Germany later signs a treaty with the Ottoman Empire, who was also facing a lot of threats and was continuing to decline during this time. So here's a little visual for you. So this being the major alliances prior to the war that will be one of the causes of the war. Here's what it'll look like on the eve of World War I in 1914. The purple will later become the Central Powers who will oppose the Allies. If you see this map, you can see that Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire geographically face a lot of challenges because they are landlocked. It's something that Germany will prepare for, knowing that it might lead to a two-front war. So please note how geographically challenged these Central Powers will be in this war. And of course, that's one of the reasons that Great Britain and France created an alliance with Russia, as they knew this would pose a problem. And obviously, Great Britain and Russia and France had not always been the best of friends up to this point in our study. So once again, there's a lot of hatred going around. The French wanted that territory of Alsace and Lorraine back. Most people living in the parts of Lorraine absorbed into Germany spoke and considered themselves French, so they were not happy with being under German control. You also now had these colonial interests. The unit of imperialism we just studied created a rivalry between France and Germany. So you had a lot of mistrust there. And these hatreds that were now within the Austria-Hungary dual monarchy that we saw created under nationalism. So the Austrians and Hungarians who dominated the other nationalities of their territories were satisfied, but many of the territories within here were not. You saw the Czechs, the Slovaks upset, Romanians, and you have these Slavic states, the Croats, the Slovenes, and the Serbs, who are the most dissatisfied, and that's why Bismarck called this territory in the Balkans the tinderbox of Europe. So Russia is going to have a close tie to the Slavic people, and they're going to look at themselves as a protector of this region. So that's what drags the Russians into this region. Some have said that World War I was one big bar fight. I'm going to try to bring in some humor. You know, my jokes often fail, but this can get tedious. So continuing with some of the hatreds, Pan-Slavism is going to be a term that you should know. It's a nationalist movement to unite the Serbs, the Bosnians, the Slovenes, and the Croats into a single political entity. At the end of the war, England and France will basically redraw the map of Europe, and that state will ultimately become Yugoslavia, and nobody is within that region will be entirely happy with that. So many Serbs were committed to joining Bosnia and Serbia. This is critical to understand for the start of the war, as we're about to get there in a few seconds. Okay. So some more hatreds. The Russians are looking once again to expand into this territory, and they are going to start controlling some of the supply routes into the Black Sea. I'll show you a map of that in a second. The British had long tried to keep the Russians from controlling this territory. We saw in the defeat in the Crimean War, which hurt Russia badly, but this only temporarily diminished their interest in the region. And we see that the British, who had traditionally tried to keep the Russians out of this territory, will ultimately have to form an alliance with the Russians. Here's a pretty good map of there. As you could see, critical trading lanes in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. This is a region right here that the Russians will control. And obviously this brings the Ottoman Empire into this dispute as well. So here's a couple of things on the alliance system that you can read. I don't have to read them for you. I think the most critical point here is Bismarck warned that you should be on the favorable side of the balance of power, meaning the 5 big powers in Europe, you should have at least 2 alliances. And if you can see here that Germany did not listen to this advice, as they will have an alliance with Austria-Hungary, and Britain will have an alliance with France and Russia. Bismarck won't be alive to see the start of this war, but these are things that he saw coming, and if Germany had listened to Bismarck, they actually did listen to him, and they're going to have a plan for this, as we'll see, but that plan will ultimately fail. That's coming up soon. You can see a couple points here. The Dreadnought is going to be a huge battleship that's created during this time. They will be called dreadnoughts. There's a great book about this called Dreadnought that I highly recommend reading. And the Germans are going to start developing a lot of these massive ships on their own. They're going to start feeling emboldened, especially under the Kaiser at this time. And there's a picture of one of the dreadnoughts. Look at the guns on these. And imperialism, as you can imagine, is going to be another major cause for the battle of these colonies. Nationalism, we're going to look at it especially in the Balkans here. So this is a term that was coined by Bismarck. And if you look at this, Serbia is going to be a key player in starting this war. The Balkans increasingly became a key to maintaining peace in Europe. The creation of the new states carved out of what had formerly been the Ottoman territory allowed national identities to take hold. Prior to this, people from different backgrounds had always been defined by a sense of community, mostly under the Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire. And the division of these states, or the wanting of independence within these states, created a rivalry between Russia and Austria-Hungary in southeastern Europe. As we talked about, Russia is becoming bigger influence in these territories. There will be a revolution in 1903 in Serbia, where the king and queen of Serbia were assassinated. Russia quickly will recognize the new government. A lot of Serbian nationalists began to call for a union with Macedonia, which was still part of the Ottoman Empire. Macedonia consisted of Macedonians, Serbs, Bulgarians, Jews, and Greeks. Relations between Serbia and Austria-Hungary worsened during this time, and religion became much more identified with the emerging national identities in this region. So this is going to lead to Balkan wars, okay? And the great powers struggled to keep the lid on this tinderbox. So there was a crisis in Bosnia in 1908. It demonstrated that hostilities in the Balkans could carry Europe to war. So a couple of the key players here: Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece. They formed the Balkan League with the intentions of completely freeing the Balkans from Ottoman rule. So they were encouraged by an insurrection in Albania and a Turkish defeat in Libya to the Italians. So Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece declared war on Turkey in 1912. This is known as the First Balkan War. It will last less than a month, with the Balkan League emerging victorious. So Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece each annexed territory. Albania received its independence. So these Balkan wars will ultimately lead to a major change in the map of Europe. This is what it had looked like in 1878. You see Austria-Hungary basically overseeing this territory, Bosnia-Herzegovina. You know, these new territories are starting to emerge, and they're not going to like Austria-Hungary in this region. Here is what the map is going to look like after the Second Balkan War in 1913. You see Russia becoming a big player here, the Ottoman Empire losing influence. You see these territories here. And once again, Bosnia is going to be a territory that, especially that some Serbian nationalists believe is theirs. So the spark of this war, okay, this is known as the spark. We just told you the four main causes. And there's going to be an assassination of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand. He's 60 years old. He's fallen out with Francis Joseph, despite being the heir to the Habsburg throne. He had more sympathy for the South Slavs than any member of the royal family. And this caused the Hungarians to dislike him. He was a pretty personable guy. His wife, Sophia, who Francis Joseph did not like the fact that he married her. They went down to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. A lot of his security team warned him about doing that, but he wanted to hopefully help relations in that territory. And while he's there, his motorcade, there is a pipe bomb thrown into his car that bounces off his lap out of the car and wounds two of his officers. And he escapes from this first attack. And his security detail wants to get him out of there as quickly as possible. But the Archduke wanted to go check on his security detail who had been injured with the explosion. Okay. And the Archduke will continue on, give a speech. And on his way back, he's going to be stuck in traffic. There's many accounts to what happened here. But I'll go by one that my professor told me. I'll stick with that one. One of the facts that can't be disputed is the Archduke's going to be assassinated. My professor had said Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist, a member of the Black Hand, a extremist group in Serbia, basically was very upset about missing his opportunity to kill the Archduke. So he basically goes into what would be a modern day deli or a luncheonette, and he's ordering a sandwich, and he looks out the window, and the car of the Archduke is stuck in traffic right outside of the luncheonette. Princip runs out. This is a picture of the Archduke and his wife Sophia a few moments before the assassination, his family. And Princip runs out, and this is an artist drawing of it, and shoots the Archduke, shoots his wife, and they are fatally wounded. There's Princip being taken into custody. He would die in jail a couple months, if it's not months, a few years, just a couple years after it in jail. Member of the Black Hand. If you ever go to a museum in Europe, this is the clothes you see here of the Archduke when he was killed. There's the car. And this is going to lead to the major powers of Europe within the next month basically becoming involved in this war. This event, the spark of the war, happened on June 28th, 1914. So I told you about a plan the Germans had. They knew that a two-front war would likely ensue if they went to war with the three powers of Europe. This plan is known as the Schlieffen Plan. So let's take a look at this. Basically, it had been drawn up by Count Alfred von Schlieffen, former chief of the General Staff. So it had been on the table for almost 10 years. You know, it called for the German armies to get the French out of the war within several weeks. So the key to this was invading France and knocking them out quickly. They had felt emboldened because of their growing military, as we talked about in the last unit, their bigger navy. And they knew ultimately this would force them to fight the Russians in the east, But this plan called for a very quick defeat of the French in the West. Okay. Now, in order to get quickly into France, they would have to march through Belgium and the Netherlands to avoid a network of fortifications that the French had started building immediately after the victory in the Franco-Prussian War. Okay, so Bismarck once again had warned against this, conducting the war in two fronts, but the German military started to believe that they could defeat French quickly and then turn their eyes to Russia. So this is part of the plan, as you see these arrows coming in quickly from the left, knocking the French out of the war and coming through Belgium, okay, and the Netherlands. This is where the alliance system comes into play because Belgium had a protector in this. If you guess Great Britain, you're correct. If not, you now know. So here's a close-up of it. And it's almost going to work. We're going to see lots of propaganda against the Germans in this. Remember, you have some neutral parties on the side, probably the largest being the United States. Now, let me see what we have here next first. The term "a jolly little war," most of the powers of Europe thought if war started, it would be a quick war. And once it starts, a lot of the troops that march to war believe they will be back by Christmas. What they hadn't really fully understood at this point was that these new weapons of war would not enable that to happen. We will get to the weaponry in our second webcast. So, Austria-Hungary will declare war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. This is how the dominoes are going to fall, about a month after the assassination of the Archduke. Okay? In between that month from the assassination, Austria-Hungary had given a lot of demands to Serbia in response to the assassination. Obviously, the assassination being at the hand of a Serbian terrorist. And they basically met all of the conditions, but a few. But Austria-Hungary gave them an ultimatum to either adhere to all of the demands or they would declare war. So what emboldened Austria-Hungary at this time? Well, Germany is their protector, and obviously they're in an alliance with them. And Germany was really eager to go in and send a message to these nationalists in the Balkans. So they are looking for war at this time. And remember, the Kaiser has been feeling a little inferior being part of the family of Queen Victoria, and Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, also being a descendant of Queen Victoria. They're actually related, and they send a lot of correspondence to one another during these, tense-filled days. And they're usually very polite, very respectful. If you ever want to research that, they're very interesting to look at. So Russia, we had learned, had become a protector of Serbia. So they mobilized its army on July 30th. So tensions increase. So Germany warned Russia to suspend their mobilization of troops. They ceased to do this. So Germany mobilized its army for war on August 1st. So you see three of the major powers on the verge of war. Okay. We had talked about socialists gaining power in France last unit, 1905. And their leader, Jean Jaurès, is assassinated during this time. So on August 3rd, Germany declares war on France, falsely claiming that French planes attacked Nuremberg. Okay. So if you remember the alliance system, if Germany's going to declare war on France, France had an alliance with Russia. Okay. And German forces are going to go through Belgium. Belgium is going to have an alliance with Britain. So you can predict what's going to happen next. On August 4th, Britain will declare war on Germany, and you now have the five powers of Europe at war. And that is how World War I started. We'll stop this webcast at this point, and we will do another webcast shortly. I hope that this worked. I hope that they also get better.